Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. I'm delighted to have Mark here. I've been trying to get him to talk about mindfulness for some time, and I'm glad that he can finally do it. So the topic today is going to be, what is mindfulness and how it can improve the quality of your life. For those who are new, the structure is that we're going to have a short presentation of about 20 to 25 minutes. After which we are going to go directly into the breakout rooms with some general questions. So we can talk about it in small groups of about 6 to 8 people. After which we come back here with the best questions you have for Mark. All right, so that's the format. And let me get started. Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you, Shrikant, for inviting me to present. Firstly, for those wondering about my accent, I am originally from the UK, but I have lived in the US for some time now. Some people may know me, some people may not. Also, before I get started on my presentation, I wanted to stress I'm by no means an expert on mindfulness. I'm a dabbler, and I consider mindfulness a very personal practice. So like different things work differently for different people. I think that's generally true of everything, like diets as well. But mindfulness is definitely one of those things that if somebody tells you this is the only way to do it, I would argue with them. I think there's many paths to the same destination. Having said that, I'm going to be presenting some of my personal ideas and things I've come across over the years, and hopefully some of those ideas will be useful to at least some of you. My hope is also to learn from you tonight, and that we can all learn from each other. That with the breakout rooms and the Q&A afterwards. Having said that, I'm going to try and keep this fairly high level and fairly short. Hopefully I won't be going too fast. That is a tendency of mine, so I've got to be conscious. I have to be mindful of that. But we want to allow plenty of time for conversation and want to encourage that dialogue. Okay, so having said that, so what is mindfulness and why should we care about it? I think most of us will say that there's times in our lives when we are stressed out, either because we're fretting about the future, or we're more often reliving something that just happened. Like personally, I can be very upset and angry in the moment and realize it's because somebody cut me off in traffic a few minutes ago. So I have the emotion, but it's no longer relevant to the people I'm interacting with. And so that's an example. I think we can all think of personal examples ourselves. And obviously too much of this really impacts one's quality of life in a negative way. So mindfulness, simply put in my definition, is just the practice of paying attention to the present moment. And one of the powers of doing that is that you can then avoid this trap of what I call overthinking. If you're worrying about the future, or you're still annoyed about something that you can't change in the past, that can be a trap. Being mindful can also just reduce our stress levels in a general way. And something I'm going to come back to tonight that I found invaluable was it can give us some space to actually gain personal insights into ourselves, like by observing our mind or how we're reacting, what triggers our reactions. This can help us discover who we are, who we want to be, what our values are, etc. And in terms of those focused things of looking about the future and the past and being mindful in the present, you can also just use it to relax. A lot of people just get into that just to be able to take that time out to calm down. Maybe it can help you be a bit less reactive in the moment, have a little bit more self-control. Most people like to feel that they can be in control more of their lives if possible. Medically speaking, like a lot of medical professions have now recognized the value of mindfulness techniques. It's having a big impact on treatment of depression and worry, particularly in terms of people facing health challenges and cancer treatment. They're going through a tough time, so they're facing challenges that introduces a lot of worry into their life. Mindfulness can be a way to not dwell on all those scary thoughts. I did want to mention, when I talk about worrying, I'm not talking about medical conditions that might be like PTSD or some deep anxiety. I have seen some things, I wanted to draw this out, that people say that this is a cure-all for all types of emotional issues or challenges. I would say no, mindfulness is not a cure-all. Be very skeptical of somebody that says, hey, if you just go be mindful, you can just overcome these things. It can be helpful to large groups of people, But yeah, it's things like PTSD or anxiety. If it's really bad, I suggest seeking an expert, not relying on reading a book or listening to me for sure. Okay. So a bit more about mindfulness. There's sort of two basic approaches at the very high level. Again, there's the traditional Eastern Buddhist approach. It's largely based upon like deep focused meditation, normally with a significant spiritual component. While the Western approach, as is usual, we took a look at that. We took what we liked and some things we didn't like quite so much. So it's focuses much less on the spiritual aspect and is more what I'll call quote unquote psychological. And as with many things that we took from the East, as we started to apply the scientific analysis to it with our psychology experiments, we discovered that these things are real and they have a real measurable power. So it's not all waving around and magic. It is a real thing. So having said that, I'm going to try, as I mentioned in the introduction, if you guys check the meetup site, this is a big topic. We could go into this in great detail, spend a lot of time on meditation techniques. I'm going to try and stay away from that. We've probably got a mixed audience. Some people probably have a lot of experience. Some may have little or none. So I'm going to try and present some ideas that I came across that I found of value to me, that I consider like easy to try, so that you can have a look at them. And if you want to try them out, you'll hopefully know pretty quickly whether it's for you or not. I'm trying to stay away from those things that require a deep investment of time initially. Okay. So I would classify mindfulness into three areas. There's three sort of approaches you can take to mindfulness. There's what I mentioned before, that deep focused meditation, like maybe sitting in a pose, maybe doing a mantra, or maybe you're doing standing or walking meditation. Seating is where it often starts. Maybe you're trying to completely empty your mind. Maybe you're trying to dedicate a significant amount of every day. So that I would call focused, mindfulness focused meditation. Then another type of meditation is where it's part of other activities. A classic example would be yoga. So you're like working on your body with poses, but there's also, you're doing some mental training, the mindfulness part of it. Being aware, obviously with yoga, it's mainly focused on being aware of your body. But depending on your teachers, many of them may have you in certain poses try and look at what's going on in your mind, not just your body. Obviously, the word mind is in mindfulness, so I think it's important to consider the mind as well as the body, but obviously they are connected. On a personal note, I came to some of this through my training in martial arts. I did a number of martial arts, and they do talk about some techniques for breathing, for example, for strength and for focus. They definitely talk about mental techniques, the empty mind, so that you can not try and predict your opponent, but just observe your opponent's behavior and then react accordingly. And as a little aside, I would say, like, if you are dealing with issues in the past or worries about the future, if you're doing something like kickboxing and there's a person in the ring trying to hit you in the head, it's a great way of being in the now. When somebody's trying to hit you in the head, if you're not in the now, you will get hit in the head. So you learn very quickly to pay attention to what's going on around you. But obviously that's not for everybody, but just a little aside. And then the third type, which is the one I'm going to spend most time talking about, is the idea of just taking short pauses as part of your daily life. Just like, taking that time out to be mindful. And obviously that can start off very infrequently. It can then build into something that you'd want to do for longer periods of time. I personally started dabbling with this, then I got much more intense about it. But now I've backed off to where I am mainly doing the third thing. I'm mindful when I feel I need to be mindful. But then when I was preparing this presentation, I started looking and I said, like the person I am now, I think I do have a higher general level of mindfulness of what's going on around me than I did before I did the deep practice. But I'm not saying that's for everybody. I'm saying that I am going to urge people to just try out that idea of, like, if you notice you're getting stressed out, this is a time to step back. Okay. So a little bit more about how I came to mindfulness and why the benefits I personally got from it. So I had my martial arts. That got me interested in some of the Eastern philosophies. I got interested in Buddhism, and I looked at my personality. And I'm being very personal here. Like, I'm what I call anal retentive. I'm a planner. It's part of my job. I'm a project manager too. But you know, I make lists, I make plans, and I started to notice that like this was impacting my enjoyment of actually my life. I was spending all my time on my lists, and I never finished them, so I was never happy. And I said I was living in the future basically. And then at other times, I noticed that I was pretty impatient with myself, particularly, but that also with other people. And I had this thing where I felt I was too reactive. Things would happen and upset me, and I'm going like, why am I making myself upset? Later, I would say this to myself. Like at the time, I was just upset, but later, it's like, why did I let that get to me? What so much? Like, it's not important. So these will, I don't know whether this will speak to anybody, but I wanted to share that with you, that's how I came to think this was worth looking into. And I chanced upon the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh. Some of you may have heard of him, the Vietnamese monk, peace activist, and a founder of the Plum Village School. He's typically referred to as Thai, which is Vietnamese for teacher. So if I mention Thai again, that's who I'm talking about. So yeah, he was my deep dive into Buddhist meditation and mindfulness in particular. He's considered an expert on mindfulness, even amongst the Buddhist community. So his primary teachings to get you started on this does focus on the breath and mindfulness as a way of life. And he's a living example of the benefits of it. If you ever meet him, he's very peaceful, but very funny guy. He doesn't take himself seriously at all. The last thing he wants is people to think of this mindfulness as being work. It should be a joy. Now, he's made it a joy in his life, that's for sure. It's obvious when you meet him. But anyway, so I did go away to some of the day retreats they had, and I read many of his books over the time. And I did find some of it overwhelming. It was like, you've got to dedicate your life to this to some extent. And I wasn't prepared to do that. I had other interests going on. But I did find a lot of the Buddhist techniques personally very useful. So I had a little. So his philosophy is, I'm going to read the quote here. We don't need to make a separate time for mindfulness. We can practice it in every moment of the day. So yeah, his approach is to try and make it a part of your life. It shouldn't be separate. It shouldn't be difficult. I tweak that a bit personally for myself, and I say, we can practice it at any moment of the day. Like, I'm not as good as him. I can't do it every moment of the day, but you can do it anytime. It doesn't require any tools. It just requires you and your attention. So I looked at these teachings. People who know me talk about this before. I always equate things to like I have a personal toolbox. As I've gone through life, I've picked up ideas from people, and if it works for me, I put it in my toolbox to use it for later on. And I suggest the same to you. And what I'm going to share to you tonight, I'm not expecting that everything's going to work for everybody, but these are some tools you might want to pick up. If it works for you, great. Maybe you'll tweak it a bit, makes it work better for you. Then you can put it in your toolbox. But having said that, I'm really bad about crediting where I got this stuff from. I'm not good with names and dates. So having said that, I'm now going to give you a few ideas from my personal approach to mindfulness, and hopefully that will spark some good discussions. So the number one thing I use it for is if I notice I'm getting worked up about something, I'm getting stressed, or generally I'm reacting strongly for some reason. I go, like, why am I reacting? So what's going on? So if I can recognize that, then I can remember to just take a step back and be mindful of what is happening. I can maybe be more rational, more reasonable would be a better word, about what's going on. Now, obviously that's a trick in itself. I'm not always self-aware enough to recognize when this is happening, though I think I've got much better at it with practice. As with most things, you get better with practice. So that technique of just like checking in regularly on my state of mind, like I did in the past, I would set an alarms like every hour, like, what's going on with you? Just step away from the desk or whatever, or just go into your mind and go, how am I feeling right now? Oh, I'm feeling pretty calm. Okay, I can go back to work. Oh, I'm feeling pretty tense. What's going on? I didn't notice I was tense. Sometimes it's simple like, oh, let me just get up and walk around. That's all I need to do. Now I'm not tense anymore. Sometimes it requires more research. What's going on? What am I reacting to? So to me, that's all part of mindfulness, just like, as I said, that idea of becoming more self-aware and being able to step back and observe. So a few ideas for when you want to be mindful, when you're choosing to be mindful. I'm going to start off with the classic one, checking on your breathing. This is very powerful for most beginners. It's not that you're going to change your breathing. You're just noticing it. Just notice. Am I breathing faster than usual, slower than usual, deeper than usual, or more shallow than usual? Now, this can tell you a lot about just your general level of excitement or stress. Like if anybody's ever been to like an integrative medical doctor, especially whose background is in Eastern medicine, they'll be checking your pulse, but they'll be observing your breathing too. These are all indicators of your general sense of well-being in that moment. And of course, it doesn't just have to be breathing. Some people like just check in with the whole of your body. Now, do I have like crook in my neck? As I said, am I just stiff? Am I tense somewhere? Is there an ache or a pain? Putting yourself in your body is a very simple way to get out of that craziness in the head. The mind and body are connected. So if you wherever you put your attention, that's helps you lead your mind away from the craziness. Having looked inside yourself, I think it's also very important to look outside yourself. Check on what's happening around you. Maybe you're out in nature. That's a great place to be mindful. I think obviously for most people, it's a no-brainer. But also, like if there are other people around you, how are they behaving? It's very good to look at how they're behaving, not with the like judging them, but just say like, what's going on, and then look at am I reacting to how they're behaving, for better or worse? But again, just observing. So the idea is that question, those two questions that lots of people have heard is like, where am I? The answer is you're here. What time is it? The answer is it's now. These are all things you can do to try and be mindful in the moment. But one other thing I wanted to share with you, because like some people don't like this breathing or focusing on the body. Maybe they've got a medical condition of focusing on their body reminds them of the pain they're feeling. So it's not for everybody. This is a perfect example. Like a lot of people will say, this is the way to do it. I say, it might be, it might not. Another technique that I noticed and later in life, excuse the pun, noticed, is a technique where you don't have to look at yourself if it's not comfortable for you, but just look around the place you're in, the room you're in. Notice three things in the room that you've been ignoring. Maybe there's that picture on the wall that you loved 10 years ago and now you don't even notice it there. Maybe there's a pen lying on the floor that you didn't notice had fallen there. Maybe it's just a spider web or it's a piece of dust, whatever it is. Notice three things and examine them with your mind. There's a book by Ellen Langer called The Act of Noticing New Things. That one I do remember who I got this from. But so again, going into your body, observing the people around you, or noticing three new things. So that gets you started with mindfulness. Now I'm going to go into a topic that I feel very strongly about. I'll probably be repeating this. When one's being mindful and attending to the present moment, I personally would like to stress it's very important to do this attending without judgment. I found it very challenging for me when I first did that. When I started observing how I was behaving and how I was reacting, I was being very judgmental of myself. I was being myself. It's like, geez, why did I get so annoyed? And then of course I got annoyed with myself for being annoyed. So craziness. So I had to learn to be compassionate with myself. And over time, now with the compassion and being less judgmental, I felt the power of mindfulness really start to improve the quality of my life. And subsequently, I noticed that being compassionate with myself made it, I wouldn't even say it made it easier. It just naturally, I just noticed that I was being more compassionate and less judgmental of the people around me without even trying to do it. So compassion, if you don't do it, it's going to lead to judgment, and judgment very problematic, and it's also very limiting. while you're judging and not seeing things than they are, and you're saying, oh, I don't like this, that's a particular thing, that's very limiting. You can't take action when you do that. If you pay attention without judgment, you can then consider whether you want to take action. This is another thing I wanted to stress. I'm not a proponent in the idea of the Zen empty mind. I'm not saying it's not of value. I'm just saying, as a getting started to see the benefits of mindfulness, trying to get to the Zen empty mind is a long journey. It's not a simple journey. It's not a short-term trip. But if you to start with simple mindfulness and paying attention without judgment, you don't have to empty your mind, but you can look at what's the thoughts in your head and what's going on around you. And if you're not, and if you're not getting buried in the minutiae, you can start to say, that I don't need to pay attention to. I'm going to just let that go. But this is important to me. I can choose to focus on this. Now, if you can choose to focus on certain things, not everything, like I had a tendency to do, not let anything go, had to try and do everything on my list, you can find out what's important to you. And then you have an opportunity to make the changes. One last thing about this, I do also use it just for relaxing. Just that, as I referred to earlier, I'm just coming back to that idea again. Just there is a connection between the body and the mind. If you can relax your body, you will relax your mind. Conversely, if you can relax your mind, your body will also relax. Some people come at it from the body, like yoga will come at it from the body for sure. Other people come at it from the breathing. Some of it just comes from mindful meditation. But there is definitely a connection between the two. I don't think that's news to most people, but I wanted to stress that. Okay, I've got a few more minutes. So a little bit more about judging. I'm going to say it again. Judgment is extremely dangerous to mindfulness because you now start attending to things in a judgmental way. You'll start to go down the path of negativity. You'll introduce more stress into your life, or as the Buddhists would say, you'll be increasing your suffering. A little Buddhist concept, like suffering is very simply is caused by attachment to outcomes and expectations. What is judgment? Judgment is rating what's going on versus your expectations. You are likely to be disappointed some of the time. Nobody's expectations are fulfilled 100% of the time. So you're setting yourself up for suffering. And when you're being mindful and you're trying to do that self-examination that I recommend, being attachment to outcomes before you've decided on what's important to you is at least a detour, and at worst, going off a cliff and hurting yourself. So I'm going to now just throw a few different concepts out here that when I was preparing this presentation, I wanted to put in somewhere. I couldn't do it in a totally coherent fashion, but I wanted to throw, as I said, some of these things that I've come across on my journey, just to throw them out there to see if they stick with anybody else and they could be of value to anybody else. So this is from Thay's teachings. It's about, apart from breathing, he recommends practicing smiling. He considers this part of being mindfulness. He starts the day with a smile. And now we know there's actually some science behind the benefits of smiling. There's there's over 100 different muscles that you use to smile. That's if it's a fake smile. And if it's a real smile, it's like 50% more muscles get used. So apparently there is some validity to the fake it to make it when it comes to smiling. If you get up and you smile, if you're doing smiling in the mirror or smiling at home in the room, you will improve the way you feel over time. It's not a magic bullet, but it does seem to work. And if you can actually think of I would say personally, again, I'm speaking personally, though I've read that this is fairly common. If you can think of a reason to smile, that increases the power incredibly. And lastly, smiling at other people doesn't really cost an awful lot, but I've seen it really, really improve the quality of my life by improving the quality of people around me's lives, even in a small way. I hope everybody has recognized that situation in the checkout line when everybody's stressed and the person there is like, they're having a hard time. You've got a bunch of customers in front who are very impatient to get out. Everybody's scowly and grumpy. And then there's one person who comes along who's just naturally a happier or smilier person. And they say hello and they greet people. And I've observed this. You can see the tension in people relax around. They may not all be smiling and scowling, but the energy changes. And like engaging with the checkout person, their life definitely improves. Hey, somebody recognized they're a human being. Somebody cares about them. And so there's a positive feedback in smiling. So I like to promote that idea. I'm not saying I'm the best proponent of that. I'm English, so it's against my training to just smile at people randomly. Americans, you should be better at it than me. So go for it. A little bit more about his techniques for breathing, since some people, just a little bit more about that. I wanted to mention, it's, as I said earlier, don't think about controlling your breathing, is Ty's idea. There are some schools that do want to focus on the controlled breathing. For him, and I agree with him personally, of course I do, is that can come later. Initially, don't try and control your breathing. So his simple mantra is like, when you're breathing in, you say, I know that I'm breathing in. When you breathe out, you say, I know that I'm breathing out. And then you say, okay, I'm in and out. And that brings that mind and body together. You're observing your breathing. Your body's just doing what it does naturally. You're not trying to change it in any way at all. And that, again, back to repeating what I said earlier, if you just need that time out, you haven't got time to think about being mindful, to do all the rest of that great stuff I was rabbiting on about. But you just want to like, hey, I need to step back. Just say to yourself, oh, I'm breathing in. Oh, I'm breathed out. That's it. Very simple. Doesn't require you to remember very much. I think it can be very calming. Just that little simple trick. But again, one last time. Just notice your breathing. Don't change your breathing. That's a different exercise. What else? Oh yes, attitude of gratitude. I'm sure people have heard that phrase before. Again, Ty's big in this. His approach to this is obviously he can do it all the time, but one great place to do it is when you're eating a meal. Now, a lot of people, I don't know whether people are aware there was that slow food movement, and like I don't know, it's probably 15 years ago now. The idea, instead of just sitting at your desk, rushing your meal down and going while you're working, you know, to step away and actually make a meal an event. So his idea of mindful eating, though, is to take a bite and chew it for a certain number of times, so 20 times, 50 times, whatever you want to do. But you're focusing on the eating. You're not in your head thinking about what's going to happen this afternoon or what went on in the morning. You're in the moment experiencing the food. And because it's eating, it involves the body. The body has a natural visceral reaction to it. So it's quite a powerful way to be mindful and be in touch with your body. Like breathing is one, but like eating, a lot of people find eating very visceral and found that it's much more powerful for them than just focusing on the breath. Obviously, you can't do that all the time like you can with breathing. And then on top of that basic power of mindful eating, he adds the attitude of gratitude, because this is a great time to think about all the people who were involved in getting that food onto your table. The person who had to take the food from the field, bring it to the farmhouse, take it from the farm to the silo, to the center, bring it to the sorting office, then it goes to the processing plant, gets mixed with other foods. Eventually it ends up packaged on the store shelf where you got it, and then somebody in the checkout line that you smiled at on the way out the door, you purchased it from. I liked that a lot because it gave me a sense of perspective that is a bit more philosophical. I am straying away from the pure, just what's in it for me benefits of mindfulness, but I wanted to bring that to you guys as well. What else did I have? Oh, yes. Sometimes people, when they're getting into the mindfulness, they see all these thoughts entering their mind. As I said, try not to hold on to them, but if there's some you want to remember and attend to focus on because those are important, that's totally fine. But there is an image that I wanted to share with people that I found useful, and when I've mentioned to other people, they've reacted well to it, which is, if you are doing that meditation and you've got all these thoughts around you and you're having a hard time not reacting to them, letting them go, think of your thoughts. They're not a part of you. You're experiencing your thoughts, but you're not necessarily creating them. You're like standing under a waterfall. So that water that's pouring down on you, these are all those thoughts that are just coming through you. And if you try and hold out your hands and try and grab that water, it's going to be very difficult to hold. If you can, you're going to be able to only hold onto a fraction of that water. And as more water pours down, it's just going to wash out of your hands. So don't try. Just stand under the waterfall, feel the thoughts going through you and passing on. So I wanted to share that little technique with you too. Okay. Lastly, I wanted to talk a bit more about values. People who know me, they're not going to be surprised to hear me use that word. I mentioned earlier about mindfulness can be used to create a space for self-reflection. If you can get away from all those crazy day-to-day things and you're looking at what's going on inside you, for me, I found it helped me to discover myself. As part of observing how I was behaving, there was some judging, so like, do I like the way I'm behaving or don't I like the way I'm behaving? But I've tried to make like, that was deliberate attention. And I said, okay, why do I not like the way I'm behaving there? What's driving my dislike of that? And underlying that was my values. I wasn't happy with myself because I wasn't living up to what I perceived my values to be. So I found that very powerful. And I'll share something somewhat embarrassing, was that I also observed certain behaviors going on that were in conflict with what I thought were my values. I'm going like, well, why am I constantly behaving this way if it's against my values? And that's what I had to realize, that I didn't really care that much about that value. That wasn't really a value of mine. It was maybe something I thought I should have value, or the way I thought I should behave. But obviously deep down, I didn't really believe that that was the way for me to be behaving, because I just wasn't doing it. So there was the reinforcement of certain things that I wanted to promote in myself, but there was also the need to discard things that I discovered I was misleading myself about. And mindfulness for me created that space to discover that. And for people who've been on other 52 ideas, we talk a lot about the idea of the destination and the path. And like, you may never reach your destination, you may never climb that mountain, but the way I think of it is that you've got a destination, you've got a path. The values to me are, how do you travel along that path? How do you behave upon that journey, whatever your life journey is? You know, obviously, how do you interact with the world around you, with yourself, or always with yourself, but of course with others. And for those people who are interested in that, who like been exploring their life path and discovering their values, but haven't tried mindfulness, if they think they're struggling with any of those concepts, try mindfulness. See if that gives you the space to make progress in that self-analysis or reflection. And lastly, I want to come back to something I mentioned earlier. When you're on that path and you've figured out some of what you want to do in life, remember, action can only take place in the present. The past is gone, it's unchangeable. The future is somewhat unknowable. So mindfulness can be very freeing, puts you in the moment to be able to take action, not react, but act. But again, judgment. If you're doing this with judgment, you are limiting yourself. And I think very severely limiting yourself. You'll be spending your time judging when you could be taking action. I can't remember the exact quote, but I think it's from Kwai Chang Caine, the Kung Fu TV series. There's a lot of Taoist philosophy in that for anybody old enough to remember that TV series. But the basic concept is Kwai Chang Caine is talking to his master, and he's upset about how he behaved. He regrets some action he's taking, and he's absorbed in this regret. And his master's basically pointing out to him, like, it's silly to regret things that it's not your fault. Makes sense. But he also said, but it's also silly to regret things that are your fault, because regretting it isn't changing anything. Taking action to remediate it, that's my words, I'm paraphrasing, that's doing something about it. If you have regrets, what action can you take? Get rid of the regrets, take action. So again, I just wanted to drive that home. Get rid of the judgment. Mindfulness can allow you to be free, to be in the present, to take the actions you want. Okay. So I'm looking at the time. I'm talked too long. Okay. So in conclusion, very briefly, Mindfulness is the practice of paying attention to the present moment. Personally, I believe it can help reduce stress and associated ills and can give you the space for personal insights. To be mindful, ask yourself, what's going on right now? Breathe in your body or around in the world around you. Pay particular attention to the people around you. Quick technique, quick thing. How are your feet feeling right now? Probably nobody was aware of their feet, but now you can think about your feet. Are my shoes pinching a little bit? Are they very cold? Maybe you're not wearing shoes. Maybe you can feel the carpet or the grass under your toes. Again, just putting yourself in your body. It's very easy to do. Just have to do it. And again, when you're being mindful, do it without judgment and with compassion. Compassion prevents the judgment. Judgment limits action. And if you want to take action, you want to get rid of judgment. The way to do that, be mindful with compassion. I've mentioned Ty. He has a book called Peace is Every Step, which I would recommend is a great introduction to many of these concepts. Also, if you're more interested in like a psychological approach, there's Ellen Langer. I mentioned her earlier. And then a lot of people have probably heard of John Kabat-Zinn. He took the approach of focusing very largely on stress reduction, mindfulness techniques for stress reduction. And I know there's a fairly popular app now from Sam Harris called Waking Up. I haven't tried it. I don't know anything about it, but I wanted to throw that out there for people who prefer apps. And if you liked anything I said, I probably stole it from somebody else. And if there's anything you didn't like, that was probably my own idea. I have a very, very final thought. This is an anonymous quote from Anonymous. You can't change the past, but you can ruin the present by worrying too much over the future. So I would say, pay attention to them now. And thank you for listening.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. All right, folks. So what we're going to do now is, firstly, I want to point out that there are many people here who have got considerable experience on mindfulness. And there are many people here who don't. Okay. So what we're going to do is we are now going to go into the breakout rooms. And Mark has identified some questions. So we're going to discuss those questions in the breakout rooms for about 20 minutes. And gather your thoughts, and most importantly, gather your questions for Mark. Discuss them with each other and bring the best question that you have back, and we will deal with it. So Mark, could you read out the questions you have for the breakout rooms?
Sure. Thank you. So yes, basically, for everybody, like based upon your preconceived ideas, or maybe on some of what I said tonight, what does mindfulness mean to you? And following on from that, like, how do you think you might benefit personally from mindfulness practice? And obviously, if you have tried mindfulness practice, what benefits have you experienced? And also, what challenges have you encountered? I think that might be a source of good questions.
Excellent, excellent. So folks, we've got the following rules in the breakout rooms. First, let everybody talk, give their answers to these questions for between 1 to 2 minutes each. Okay, so you get all the thoughts on the table. Then the rules are keep on topic, be brief, and be courteous. All right, that's how we found to get the most out of the breakout rooms. In 20 minutes, automatically, you will end up coming back here and come back with the best questions that you have, and we'll go from there. Starting the breakout rooms now.
It's complicated.
Yes, and what we'll see, let's see what people have to say and ask, and we'll go at the ear. All right, welcome back, folks. Welcome back. So it is time for questions, and rules are the same. Go ahead and type. We've got 4 rules. Go ahead and type exclamation mark in order to ask questions, or raise your hand in Zoom. Rule number 2, keep on topic. We're talking about mindfulness. Rule number 3, be brief. And rule number 4, feel free to speak your mind, disagree with anybody on anything, and do so courteously. And let's add rule number 5, especially for this. There are no stupid questions. So go ahead and ask any questions. Okay, so it's going to be Shelley, Deborah, and Joe. Shelley.
Mark,
Hi, Shelley.
you did a great job. This is awesome. I'm glad I was able to stay awake. It was worth it.
Goal achieved then.
It was really good, Mark. I really appreciate this. So I came really wanting a definition for mindfulness because, like you said in the beginning, everybody kind of has their own take on what mindfulness is. And so I was kind of confused on what is a succinct definition. So you saying it's paying attention in the present moment was really helpful for me to define it. I wrote down a bunch of items here that are going to be takeaways personally for me. One of the things that I've been struggling with recently is being impatient. It's really reared its ugly head for some reason. And so I think a lot of these are really going to help. One of the things I've been doing though, is I have been noticing when I become impatient, I've been trying to notice. But here's my question. So I'm noticing I'm impatient. Do you think it's important to understand why? Is that helpful to mindfulness? What is your thought on that? And
I would say if you're finding your patience is negatively affecting your quality of life, it might be worth trying to figure out if it's the same cause every time. Because if you can identify a singular cause that's causing that impatience a lot of the time, that could be worth it. But I don't think you have to figure out every single time you notice you're being impatient, why was I impatient? So it's somewhat situational. I guess I'm thinking of the example personally, like if you notice you get impatient and you realize it's after a drive somewhere, or you haven't eaten all day. If you notice that there's certain commonalities that are causing your impatience, then maybe you want to notice that to take action on them. But I don't know. And I guess I did have a question, like when you talk about being patient, talk about being patient with yourself, with others, or both?
It's at work. It's primarily at work. And I'm impatient with others. And so like one of the things, I believe it's selfishness, right? I mean, that's at the crux of what that's about. And as I've really been digging into this and trying to get a hold of it, because it is, I don't like me when I'm impatient, and I like to like me. So like, I want to change that. And if I don't like me, sure as heck, other people aren't going to like me. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to be pleasant to work with, which is important to me. So I just was wondering your thought, because as I've been stopping myself, catching my emotion, realizing I'm impatient, realizing it's not worth being impatient over, and this is humanity. Right? We're dealing with humans, and this is what it is, including myself. But I've been thinking about the why behind it. And for me, sometimes the why is helpful, having a deeper level of understanding. And I just wondered if you found it also to be helpful, specifically in terms of like mindfulness. I don't know. I just was wondering your thoughts.
Well, I personally did, yes, because I was impatient with myself and with others. As I said, there was leakage. I couldn't separate the two. When I will say, I don't know whether you're experiencing the same way, but like impatience comes from judgment. You're like the judgment being like, this should be done quicker, or this should be done better. And it's okay. We do have that. But then I would focus on my second keyword, compassion. It's okay to wish people were doing things faster. Maybe there's a way you can help them do things faster. Or maybe you could say, okay, I planned on this being done in the next hour. They didn't get it done in the next hour. Maybe you could say, well, I won't plan on them getting it done in an hour next time. I'll plan on them getting it done in 2 hours. Right. I will lower my expectations. Right. Like one of those Buddhist concepts is like the suffering is caused by the difference between reality and your expectations. We do have the ability to affect reality to some extent, but we also have the ability to adjust our expectations. If you keep expecting somebody to do something that they've never ever shown that they can do, maybe you're wrong to keep expecting that. And maybe you can adjust your behavior accordingly, then the need to be impatient won't arise. Maybe that would help.
Wonderful. Next up, thank you. Next up is going to be Deborah, Joe, Hyman, Kevin, Dimitri, and Hugo. Deborah, go ahead.
Hi, Mark. Okay,
Hi,
so
Deborah.
really, actually, I have a few comments and then two quick questions. I really like that you mentioned that this is not a panacea and that you mentioned anxiety in particular because I can relate to that. And I like that you provided alternatives, like an alternative to breathing and the what you're feeling in your body kind of traditional techniques. I think it can be difficult for people, some of the stuff, to focus on certain things, at least based on like what we talked about in the breakout room, in terms of people who have like obsessive or intrusive thoughts. I might just watch your presentation again as its own form of mindfulness because I actually found that very calming and encouraging. The two questions though were that I guess you could just type this in the chat when you get a chance, but the name of the author of that Three New Things book that you mentioned, I know you had mentioned that earlier. And then this is sort of a weird question, but mindfulness in terms of interacting with other people. Do you think that this is something you can practice or experience maybe in relation to others? So if you're having a conversation with someone or an experience with someone, would you consider that different from mindfulness? It's kind of like distraction or immersion in the moment. Yeah, I guess.
Oh, thank you for the questions. Somewhat related topic came up in my breakout room where we talked about the fact that I found that my mindfulness practice improved my ability to communicate with others because I became a better listener. Instead of jumping to conclusions that I knew what they wanted, and then I'd say, okay, let me jump in and be Mr. Fix-It, give them my advice, my great, wonderful advice. And even if I was right and if it was good advice, it would fall on deaf ears because I hadn't listened to what they really needed. So I would say mindful listening is great for improving communications between individuals and would also be good for society at large. I think we often jump to conclusions about the other person deliberately being offensive when if we actually asked them what they meant, maybe we wouldn't jump to such hasty and erroneous conclusions. So yeah, if you're talking about like in a personal relationship, I think, yeah, being mindful of the present moment, maybe you can notice what you're liking about the person, why you're having that relationship with them, why you want to continue or deepen the relationship. Maybe you're also noticing things that are upsetting you in some way and you never noticed them before, and then you might say, oh, that's really nothing to worry about, that's silly, you know, that's just like, that's a trigger from my past, this has nothing to do with this person, I can just let it go. Or maybe it's something that you actually need to talk to the other person about. So I don't know whether that really answers your question, but I do believe that it's definitely can help in communications for sure.
Wonderful. Next up is Joe, followed by Hyman. Joe.
Hi, Mark. Yes, I think your presentation lived up to its billing. Really quick question is it's about measurement. I do notice a significant difference when I do meditate, and essentially there's a calming effect that it has. But something that was even mentioned in the breakout room, but I've also thought about a lot, is how do you determine like measurement and progress to some degree? There are Headspace apps, there are apps that actually measure what, how mindful you're being. And then how do you reconcile that with actually being judgmental, about essentially your own personal progress? I mean, you're making a judgment as soon as you determine if you're making progress or not. So how do you reconcile those two? And then how do you even determine like your progress? There has to be some other factors that you're thinking about. I mean, other than your mind feels more calm. It's just a feeling at that point.
Now, this is a challenging question because, like, as you know, like I have a scientific background. I like to be empirical as much as possible, but these things are very tough to truly measure because they are very personal experiences. But what one person's feeling and measurement doesn't necessarily equate to somebody else's. So I'm thinking back about my personal experiences. So, well, I noticed that I was calmer in the moment. I didn't measure how much calmer, but I noticed there was a difference. And I guess I was noticing what was going on around me to measure whether I was changing. So mindfulness was being used to examine my progress in mindfulness, in a sense. I was noticing that I was less impatient with people. I was in a relationship, so I actually could ask somebody I trusted for feedback. I don't know whether that's not always possible for everybody, but that's something that you can do sometimes. Or sometimes if you're doing really good, maybe you'll receive some unsolicited positive feedback, like, hey, you seem to be chilled out, more chill today or something. You could try measuring your pulse. So, yeah, that's one way. That's one way, and measure your heartbeat. You know, sometimes when you're excited, but the thing is, it's a very rudimentary measure, and it's what is it really measuring? I don't know. I think you have to go more with how are you feeling in yourself? Do you feel like you're making progress? Do you feel like you're calmer? Do you feel like you're less impatient, or whatever it is, whatever your personal challenge is? Check. I guess all I can say is check in. You could set a schedule, maybe, if you're that sort of person, like to say, like, yeah, let me look back at my day. How does it compare to the day before? Was I more or less impatient? Was I more or less a good listener? I think maybe that's the best way of doing it. There's no absolute measure. Maybe just observing relative observations. Does that help?
Yeah, no, I think it helps a lot, actually. Even I was just thinking about when you were speaking about the idea of observing the number of thoughts, you know, is something that you know, you're having in you know, if you're stepping back and observing. So anyway, I'll leave it there. I know there's a lot of people online.
Yeah, one last thing on that, like, it's very hard to quantify this because it's very qualitative. So that's always a challenge. Thanks.
Thank you. Hyman, what's your question?
Question. Well, first and foremost, I just want to thank everyone, and thank you, Mark, especially, for allowing me to be a part of this beautiful thing that's happening. You know, when we broke off to the group, in our small group, we had a lovely kind of conversation, and it made me think of many things, as did this evening's discussion, and helped me understand things better, new techniques, etc. Question for me primarily would be how not to let other people's vibration or misdirected kind of emotional states affect me directly, and most importantly, people that I care about, such as a loved one, a family member, a sibling, who I might feel distracted or emotional or uneasy about something, and I can sense their vibration, and then not allowing that to affect me and trigger me and make me feel uncomfortable, uneasy, fearful, etc. That's a big work in progress for me, and I thought that I could might throw that out there and get some feedback for that. Thank you for the time.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, another tough question. I can give you my thoughts. I don't know that I'm right though on this one. I'm not very confident, but I think the big first step what mindfulness does is it makes you aware of it. The big thing is we're so unaware of so many of the things that are going on in us and around us. You sound like you've actually recognized the situation. So awareness is huge, I would say. I guess you could ask yourself questions like, why do I find this so challenging? Does it need to be so challenging? Is there a judgment underneath that that's causing my reaction? That is it a valid judgment or an invalid judgment? I do come back when I have these sort of challenges to my values, and I often find, like, if this is a challenge or an affront to my core values, this is very important, and it's something that does have to be articulated to myself first, have that conversation with myself to get my thoughts clear, and then I will need to discuss it to some extent with the other person, but also listen a lot to their perspective. Don't just dump on them. So I don't know your personal situation about whether this is something that you feel that they need to change or that you just need to deal with, but you're struggling to deal with it. So yeah, it could be a journey trying to figure these things out. But said mindfulness has been used to give you the first step, which is being aware of it.
Wonderful.
Awareness.
Next up, thank you. Thank you, Hyman. Next up is going to be Kevin, Dimitri, Hugo, and Laura. Kevin.
Thank you, Shanka. Thank you, Mark. My question is, how can the mindfulness help to improve sleep in insomnia? And for example, If I lie down on the bed, I want to sleep. But the idea is, one by one, keep pop up. I cannot kill them. So any techniques you can share? Thank you.
Okay. Maybe somebody's got a better answer to this, because like I've never really had trouble sleeping. I can have all sorts of things going on in my life, but when my head hits the pillow, I can sleep. I can sleep by an airport. Once I fall asleep, I can stay asleep. So I guess like with anything else, like if you think there's an underlying cause that might be behind you at the sleep challenge, mindfulness may be of some use in that area. I don't know that this is, I'm not aware of any of my readings in the medical profession that mindfulness has been used to treat sleep disorders. I don't know if anybody else knows about that, they could comment, but I'm not familiar with that, I'm afraid. So I hesitate to comment further.
Well, next up is Dimitri, Hugo, Laura, and Ray. Dimitri.
Yeah, thanks. I'm really glad the moment you said toolbox, I'm not even exaggerating. At least once a day, in the most random conversations, I bring the concept of a toolbox, kind of talking about the quivers that I have in the back, that I have ready. So one really simple question. So right now I have three mindfulness exercises that I can pull out. I could do a 20-second meditation. I could do a 5-minute meditation, because that's the longest I could sit, or I could take a nap for 15 minutes, right? So the question I have is, I'm trying to find, or the 15-minute nap is great when I have a bed nearby, but now that I'm gonna be going back to the office soon, I may need something longer than 5 minutes. So question, how can I add something longer, maybe 7 to 8 minutes, maybe ideally 10 minutes, meditation to my toolbox? Thank you.
Okay. Oh, just before I get started, somebody asked me about posting the name, the authors and the books. I put that in the chat. Okay. I would say like having a nap serves a different purpose than being mindful and taking a mindfulness break. Like to me, taking a nap is I'm tired. I need a rest. I need to recharge. Mindfulness isn't, I'm not tired. It's like I'm stressed out. I'm too excited, or I'm upset emotionally, or I'm just reacting too much. I want to react less. Now, obviously, if you're in that heightened state, you won't be able to sleep very well. So I guess like if your challenge in sleeping is that you need to relax, mindfulness could be of use to you there. Being mindful of what's making you upset and unable to sleep, right, help you deal with it. If I understand the other part of the question is like how to just take that break, I would just say, just try it. Just explore different approaches. Like I just start off with that simple one. Like I could be sitting at my desk and just going I'm just going to think about breathing for a minute and see how I feel after that. If that's enough, I can go back to it. If I think I need 5 minutes, maybe I get up and walk away from my desk and do something more concentrated. I don't know whether that really answers your question. That's the best I can do.
Apologies. So I'll clarify. I do breath meditation. I could do it up to 5 minutes, and then I get uneasy. What I'm really trying to.
Okay.
So if I want to do breath meditation to 8 or 9 minutes, people have told me just keep at it. I've tried to keep at it. It's the moment I hit 5 minutes, I hit the climax. So I'm just wondering, do you have any recommendations?
Oh, okay. I misunderstood. Is it, just very briefly, is the challenge that you find your body doesn't want to do it anymore, or your head is too full of thoughts?
Body.
Okay. That's an interesting one. This is just an idea. I don't know if this would work. I would just get up and stretch and move around and then come back to it. I wouldn't force myself to sit there, because you said it sounds like you've been told to do that and you've tried to do that and you're encountering resistance. It's not working for you. Try something different. Get up, walk away, come back, do another 5 minutes. See if that helps.
So we did an entire series on mindfulness meditation. So on the 52 Living Ideas channel, you will see maybe about a dozen videos on this, and lots of interesting things came out. I mean, one kind of general principle is you kind of have to work with yourself and find out something that works for you. And that's going to be different from person to person. And you have to kind of respect that. That's one thing. Second thing that I really find interesting about mindfulness is that it can work at any scale. So we had people, like, for example, breath, paying attention to the breath, just taking one deep breath can do wonders. Okay. And that can happen within few seconds. At the same time, going for a 10-day retreat also can do wonders, but it's very different. So it's, so there is all these scalable things. That's what I like about mindfulness. So depending on, and each of them has its own strengths and weaknesses, own prices to pay, own difficulties and own rewards. And you can choose between them. So I think working with yourself and observing yourself is very important, because that's kind of the heart of mindfulness itself. What do you think, Mark?
I've just noticed I'm not able to follow the chat while I'm talking so much, but I think some people have been posting some ideas in the chat related to some of the recent questions that might be helpful. But yeah, I think just to reiterate, one size does not fit all. We can definitely, those videos can definitely give you lots of ideas to try, and hopefully one of them will provide you with some success. But yeah, I'm a firm proponent, like people have heard me talk about this before. Some things will say, well, you just got to be bashing your head against that wall and push through to the other side. And I'm like, no, that hurts. Why can't I just take a step to the right and walk around the obstacle? So yeah, try a different approach. Don't believe people when they say this is the only approach. Never trust anybody who claims they have the whole truth.
Excellent. Next up is going to be Hugo, Laura, Ray, and Dean. Hugo.
Yeah, thank you, Shrikant. Thanks, Mark, for this mind-bending conversation. My question, and I'm going to share the context, and I'm going to jump to the question. So Mark mentioned Waking Up meditation app from by Sam Harris. I've been doing that for over a year now, and I found it very useful and beneficial for me. And I noticed, a huge difference in terms of, getting to the point what I want to be. There's different aspects for the guided meditation that Sam Harris, does. And one that I'm still struggling with is he says, turn attention upon itself and look for the one who's looking. We briefly brought this up during our breakout room. Somebody asked the question. I did my best to explain what it is, even though honestly, I'm still like learning what's that. So my question, Mark, if you have any experience with that, if you can share your thoughts, if you are at a point where, turning attention upon itself, makes sense for you, and how. I think.
Okay, so yeah, this is definitely getting into the deeper aspects of meditation. Again, qualifier, I'm no expert. I have dabbled with this concept. Again, this is a highly personal approach. I found it very difficult to think of the self looking at the self. So my trick was to be schizophrenic. I turned it into the two aspects of myself looking at each other, like having an inner dialogue with oneself. Like some people have that inner voice that they talk to all the time. Some people, they don't ever hear that voice, but that's what I tried. So I didn't try look. Some people talked about looking in the mirror. I did not find that image helpful, but I did find this schizophrenic idea of how should I put it? Mentoring myself. Like there'll be the one self of me would be asking the question, and the other half of me would be answering the question. And so then when you turn that into meditation, it's okay. So one's experiencing the thoughts, and the other's observing that person experiencing the thoughts. This is a very tricky concept. It's very hard to put into words. Does that strike any chords with you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it all boils down to that everything is consciousness.
Yeah.
The senses, and being the subject, looking at an object, and then in a finger snap, turning that attention upon the, the person who's looking. All that exists, exist in the consciousness,
Okay, yeah, we're definitely getting into some of the philosophy of meditation, the idea of like things like the observer effect and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Wonderful. Next up is going to be Laura, Ray, and Dee. Laura, what's your question?
Okay, just a couple of things. First, I wanted to say that I found mindfulness very helpful early on for me because I was too much in my head, and it helped me to get out of it and find a good place where I could be at a calm. The other thing with that is that, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, I'm not good at meditating, so it was very helpful to have that serene place for myself. The other thing that I found, I always believed in saying hi as a passerby and smiling, and I strongly believed in that. It made people's day better. And I know there has been research on that. So I'm a doer of that. Now, the mask thing definitely had an effect, but you can look at people's eyes and know if they're smiling. So I think it was important to continue with that as much as possible. Though during the COVID, we weren't out much. Now, my third piece is the following. And here's where my question may lie. I believe humor is very important in one's life and one's day. And one of the things that I always felt is important was to, I'm actually a funny person, and I can make people laugh pretty well. And I think that it was really important for me to make a person laugh because I felt that it would make their day better. And so anybody, I talk on the phone a lot to, people in offices, and I know they're probably bored. And I can usually cue in and get them laughing a lot. And I actually get to laugh a lot too. And I'm wondering, for me, I think it's part of my mindfulness to be able to make somebody laugh. And it also, from a point of view of trying to do something good for somebody in the course of a day where I limit it, that actually is really important to me. So I sort of feel, that that's mindfulness for me. Is that possibly a form of mindfulness that I make somebody laugh?
Well, in the sense that mindfulness is about being in the moment, I think humor is very much a thing in and of the moment. So in that sense, you are experiencing something in the moment. So yeah, I would say you could consider that. I would like to follow up on this idea of humor. I often talk about that, but I neglected to even mention it tonight. The gurus, the wise people I've encountered, always have a good sense of humor. They don't like being taken too seriously. They don't take life too seriously. And I think with a lot of these conversations about mindfulness and self-improvement, it's very easy to take oneself and life too seriously. So yeah, that's a trap to be avoided. Yeah, I find being mindful, being in the present moment, letting go of some of those worries is freeing. Not just for all the other things that I said tonight, but yeah, free to laugh. Absolutely. It's like, I've said it before, and it's not original. It's like, like if we didn't have a sense of humor, our life would be unbearable. It's the only thing that keeps humans even partially sane is being able to laugh at things. And to the last point, I think you talked about being able to make others laugh. I think it's a very important quality to be able to entertain oneself. It's great to be able to interact with other people and entertain them, but you don't want to be Pagliacci, the crying clown. You want to be able to entertain yourself as well. So getting to know yourself and giving yourself the space to let go of or any negativity that you're bringing to yourself. Humor is a great weapon in that. Like, I've done it so many times to myself, like, why am I so stressed? This is stupid. First of all, this is stupid. I'm a bad person for being so stupid. But then it became, this is stupid. And when I could laugh at myself, that was incredibly freeing. And that was a step I went through that I will credit to the mindfulness practice I was doing at the time.
Wonderful. Next up is going to be Ray, followed by Dee. Ray.
Thank you very much, Mark. I've enjoyed your presentation and the tips and suggestions that you've provided for all of us tonight. In my opinion, I really feel that mindfulness can be broken down quite simply, as you may have alluded to. What is your relationship with the present moment? On Thursdays, we talked about resentment and looking in the past at things and how that affects us. Or are we in the future and really anxious about a subject? We're just simply not here in the present. What my question is, though, is some authors, such as Eckhart Tolle, who've written a lot about mindfulness and presence, bring up personality and ego. And I didn't really hear a lot of that tonight. And or speaking to that, and I was just wondering what your opinion was on that. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I could talk about that for a long time. I don't believe we can get rid of ego. It's a goal that may be worthy for some people, but we don't want to beat ourselves up when we don't achieve it. When I talked about judgment and compassion, judgment is an aspect of egotism, in my opinion. Yeah, it's like, why is it that I think my judgment on something is so damned important? That's egotistical to like view and judge everything by the impact it has on oneself and oneself alone. So I agree with that, that idea that mindfulness, again, can be that tool that makes you self-aware. So you can deal with issues of egotism and say, like, where is this me really realizing what's going on and observing what's going on around me? And when is this me projecting? So that's a very loaded term, but yeah, that idea that I'm making assumptions about what I'm observing that aren't real because they're tainted by my biases or my so that was what I talked earlier about, like discovering my values. As I said, sometimes I found behavior that reinforced my understanding my values. Some of it ran counter to that, and I had to realize that I wasn't understanding myself, and part of that was my ego was in the way. Partly it's you've been trained to think a certain way and it's very hard to let go. What's the thing that's not letting go? It's that ego. The ego is scared of change. It wants predictability over everything else, pretty much. But as on many of these other conversations that people have talked about very articulately, it's very self-limiting if you do that. You don't have to go bash your head against a brick wall, but if you do, but it's good to sometimes get out of your comfort zone. And letting go of ego, I think, is a very important aspect of that to free yourself.
Wonderful. Next up is Dee.
Yes, Mark, I would agree on point about getting rid of the ego and the self-judgment. That is the crux of many people who worry themselves to death, I would think. Going back to a long time ago when someone was saying that they had a hard time sleeping. My husband also had a hard time sleeping all his life. But I found for me the solution was the reason why you have a hard time sleeping is because you do have all of those waterfalls of thought. So the minute that you release that waterfall of thought and you do the deep breathing, then you are in your present of experiencing your breath, then you can fall asleep much easier because you essentially have to empty your mind. So in order to go to sleep. So that's one of the things that I wanted to bring up. The other thing is that the other issue is that because we worry so much, this creates the stress. This distracts us from the present mindfulness. That's all.
Yeah. I did have another thought about the sleep thing, because like there's many reasons why people can't sleep. And there's falling asleep and then there's staying asleep. They can be very different challenges. It sounds like your husband was helped by that because he was suffering from worries or an overactive mind. So mindfulness is very good for dealing with the issue of an overactive mind. But I agree with that. But I wanted to say, again, it's not an answer for everybody. There's some people I know can fall asleep very quickly, but they can't sleep through the night. And that could be very different. And one thing I just thought, since many people have suggested this thing about, is it a problem for you or is it a problem that society is putting on you because you're being told you should sleep so many hours a night and you're not, so you must be sleep deprived? Like, are you okay that you just have an unusual sleep pattern? There's a lady on one of the other Zoom sessions that I've been to, not with 52 Ideas, but like, she has a very unusual sleep pattern. She goes to bed at like 3 o'clock in the morning and gets up at noon. For most of her life, she was trying to live a sleep pattern that conformed to society, and she had huge sleep problems. It was only later in life that some doctor advised her, no, just try sleeping when you want to sleep. And now she had some medication for some other issues, but like, yeah. So like, we're on a Zoom and we're all like dropping dead, and she's just having lunch, and she's so much happier. She stopped trying to conform to expectations and is following what her body needs. Again, I would say, mindfulness can be something that helps people discover these things about themselves.
Wonderful. So Mark, do you have any kind of observations, kind of closing thoughts, any kind of new things that you learned through this interaction?
I noticed that sleeping or lack thereof is a big issue for people. As I said, I have to remind myself that I'm very fortunate that hasn't been a challenge for me. I just want
to interject one thing here. My grandfather was very fortunate. I've not seen anybody. It's like, there is like this, he had the ability to sleep in whatever situations. It could be very noisy. It could be, the only thing I've not seen him do is to walk in his sleep. But other than that, standing, he was able to do. So he had this, and he could do that like that. Anytime he wanted, he could just fall asleep. So it's I think there's a lot. Go ahead. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Oh no, that's good. Like, I can't fall asleep. I need quiet, but once I'm asleep, I'm gone. But I just had a sudden thought on this. The military, they have to learn when you're in the military to grab sleep when you can, because that's part of their thing. So like, a lot of them, that you'll see them, hey, they're at the bus stop, they're on the train station, they're asleep. So so maybe there's a trick that the military has to encouraging people to be able to sleep anywhere. Might want to Google that and see if there's any tips there.
No, we should do.
My other takeaway.
Go ahead.
Okay.
And I just want to say one thing about sleep. I think sleep is a humongously large topic. There is all kinds of biological, chemical, mental things. So I think at some point we should look at it. I look forward to doing like a meetup on sleep itself, because it's such a big, there's so many things going on. So look forward to doing that. Go ahead, Mark.
I guess one other takeaway, that something that piqued my interest that I hadn't thought too much about consciously, was the idea about how mindfulness works when relating to other people, in relationships as opposed to just casual contact. I spoke about that, like listening more to people, but like, so that's my big takeaway. That idea about the power mindfulness can have on relationships, not just on oneself.
Yeah, no, I also, the biggest thing that I got from the meetup was that, because in some ways that's the hardest thing. What you're trying to do is that you're saying, actually, in order to relate well to other people, you kind of have to know what is going on in their heads, and you have to be aware of it. It's enormously hard, at least for me, to figure out what's going on in the other person's head in a way which is, and it's not enough to just kind of guess. You kind of have to guess it, and you have to tell it to them. And then they will say, yes, yes, but, or no, you're off. And if you can establish that loop where both parties are more aware of what is going on inside their head, I think that makes for a very deep, deep conversation and deep communication. And I think mindfulness is definitely connected with it in some way. So I look, that's interesting. So if anybody wants to comment on that topic, they're welcome to do that. You can go ahead and type exclamation mark. Mark, any other things that you want to point out?
Just one more thing on that thought there, that idea of self-awareness. Like, I'm thinking about that. if I encounter somebody who, in my judgment, is lacking in self-awareness, it's very hard to communicate with them. It's very hard to relate to them. So mindfulness, like I was thinking about, it's like, I barely understand what's going on in my own head. Without mindfulness, I wouldn't have a clue. But I can very easily jump to the conclusion that I know exactly what's going on in somebody else's head.
Yes.
And when you say it out loud, that's obviously ludicrous. Yeah, so I totally agree with what you just said. Yeah.
Yeah, and
That was the 2-1. I was also challenged by that question about how can you measure progress. I don't feel I had a good answer for that because it's qualitative. It's very hard to quantify these things. You just got to use mindfulness to examine yourself and see if you feel you're benefiting from it.
Wonderful. All right, so folks, if anybody wants to comment on the issue of mindfulness and interaction between people, how it could be used, or what kind of issues you can learn about dealing with each other better. So Dimitri followed by Joe. Dimitri, what do you think about this?
Sorry, actually, I put in the exclamation point to the point that you asked about a minute ago, if anyone wanted to speak about the sleep part.
No. Sleep, let's do, I will do a full meetup on sleep because there are just so many factors. Yes, so many factors. Yeah. I don't want to just, because the thing is that, we have to respect each of the topics.
Yeah.
Sleep, you can't really understand without, kind of looking at biology, the need for sleep, the role sleep plays in, sustaining our lives. So we have to take it from the health part and then go into the psychological part. That would be the right way to do that. So, and we will do that in a full meetup. Yeah. Next up is going to be Joe, Deborah, and Ray. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I was doing at one point was meditating in the beginning of the day, and specifically meditating on virtues, as opposed to doing a sort of self meditation like where I was trying to calm my mind. And I think that really helped me with my interactions with other people when I was doing it, because the idea that Mark had already spoken about is the idea of judgments, or even in Stoic principles that you go through and think about and consciously focus on maybe not passing judgment on somebody that particular day, or observing certain interactions that you'd be preparing for the day. And I think that really is helpful to meditate on your values, as Mark was saying a little bit earlier, and your ethics, as a way of actually helping your interactions with others. So the idea of, if you think about the idea of Stoicism as being pro-social, so many of the principles and values that that we practice often, will lend itself to our interactions with others. And so I think that that's a really important point, and that I've taken away from even the meetups that we've held here on multiple occasions.
Joe, that's a fantastic point, because what I'm realizing is that when you're mindful, right, you're less reactive. You're less reactive to everything. And one of the problems we have in dealing with people is that we are too reactive, in the sense that we just take some impression from other people, and without actually trying to figure out what is actually going on, you're reacting. Just by being mindful yourself, it gives you the distance of kind of saying, okay, I'm getting this reaction. I notice that reaction and say, okay, what is actually going on? So it gives you like a better standing place from which to just begin the human interaction in a kind of a more proactive way instead of reactive way. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, and really quickly, I mean, the idea that it becomes a habit as well is that then your interactions are automatic. So you have certain maxims that you can actually use, Stoic maxims in my particular case, that you can use, that often become, your default. And that will really help your interactions, I think. Then you're not necessarily giving way, as you said, to the impression right away. You can catch yourself, you're catching your thoughts before they become actions. And I think that that's very important. And the dichotomy of control itself, you also understand, this is outside of my control, whatever thing that I'm reacting to, so that internally you're coming to your own personal way of reacting to a situation, and you think about it if it's proportionate to the situation. So
excellent. Deborah, what do you think about mindfulness and interaction with others?
Okay, so the reason I asked this actually was because I feel like when people talk about things that are sort of experiential or like sensory, this is something when I do interact with people, I feel like that works for me. Like that's not something that I have to think about so much. It's more natural. So I guess I would say that like, I don't feel like I'm as focused on myself. It's a kind of distraction. So I'm less in my head about things because I am sort of more aware of what the other person is feeling and how we're interacting with each other. So I think it was really cool, Mark, what you said about using this to strengthen like bonds and connections, because I think you can think about it after the fact and you can say, oh, what can I take away from that? Or what was that person feeling? But I think you can also not as consciously necessarily practice this in the moment. So I actually really liked that. And I think, yeah, the idea of it being, like I said, like a visceral experience can be something that I think a lot of people do on an everyday basis without even realizing it and not having to like necessarily say a mantra or look at something or do something like that. Just it is something that is very organic for a lot of people, and not everyone all the time, but I think that it's a kind of a commonplace thing. And like, yeah, I guess that's what I would say. It's a very sensory, visceral thing. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Deborah. And thank you for bringing up these questions, because these questions, you know, like a great question is far more important than anything, any answers, because what it does is that it allows you to focus your mind on a particular issue. And there are lots of things that come out of that. So it's very powerful. Thank you. Next up is Ray. Go ahead, Mark.
Very briefly on that, because yeah, thanks again, Deborah. Yeah, great. But well, I think I alluded to it earlier when I was talking, but like I found that the fact that I was more compassionate with myself leaked into my interactions with other people. So I think I did become more mindful of other people when I related to them, even though I wasn't practicing mindfulness at the time. Some people do this naturally, Deborah. And some people need to work at it to say, yeah, pay attention to the other person, listen to them. But you said I did want to stress though, as you said, it's not an intellectual exercise at the end of the day when you do this. It's more like an attitude. It's a practice. It's not an intellectual exercise. It's a practice. You have to perform it. Sorry, go ahead, Shrikant. Yeah.
Wonderfully put. Thank you. Next up is Ray. Ray, what do you think about this?
Yes, I'm going to talk about relationship with my coworkers and colleagues relating to mindfulness. Literally 4 years to the day, I went on a weekend workshop or retreat, and mindfulness was a small component. However, when I returned from that retreat on Monday morning, one of the things that I really practiced was presence with my coworkers and colleagues. And just like what Mark was saying, just looking people in the eyes, making that eye contact, not over talking, not feeling I needed to jump into the conversation after they made a statement, really practicing active listening. Even my body language as well too, just being very open and looking at them and, you know, being conscious of maybe not being like this and closed off. And things just skyrocketed in terms of how things took off for me in that short period of time, just being mindful and present.
Wow, that's great. Great point. And I like the point about your kind of closed versus open. I think that's a very powerful thing. Because as Mark was saying, it's not an intellectual thing. It is actually in action. And what happens is that like an open posture versus a closed posture. And what it does is it actually creates like a virtuous or vicious cycle. If you are open and the other person tends to be more open, and then that actually creates a cycle. The physical movement from closed to open allows for more open at the psychological level, at the intellectual level. So there are these loops that develop, and it is truly magnificent, because it is the beautiful thing is that all of these things are not one-time things. These are all cycles. So the effect of it over time is very, very significant, because what happens is that you get used to, for example, an open posture. you get used to, everybody gets used to it. There is a kind of a level of relaxation, level of serenity, level of like a culture of openness that develops as a result of that. Then you start talking in a certain way, you connecting in a certain way. The result of having connected in that way carries over to the next thing and the next thing. And all of it kind of builds up. So the effect of these simple steps are actually outsized because of those cycles. Mark, what do you think?
I think there's definitely sort of like a virtuous cycle, just like there can be there's a positive cycle, there's a negative cycle. So definitely we want to use our intellect to be able to observe what's going on and to try and understand ourselves. But as I said, like that doesn't mean that any action is happening. And a lot of communication is not verbal. I mean, we can argue about what percentage it is, but a lot of it is just, oh, that was the other point, was like attention. I think people can tell whether you're attending to them or not, whether you're actually paying attention to them. And that's a very powerful thing. And one of the, as you said, one of the ways you indicate that is your body language, your posture. Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is that what provoked me was the idea, like mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment. But part of that, when you're dealing with related to others, is paying attention to the other person. It's huge. Everybody can tell whether they're being really having it, if somebody's paying attention to them or not. And I think we all like attention.
Shrikant, this is just one quick sentence. So when things skyrocketed in my career and people said, what are you doing? Like, what's gone on here? I simply said, I'm just more present. Yeah. And that's really all it was.
Yeah, that's amazing. And following up on what you said and what Mark said, listening, right? I mean, it's all about listening. In sense, mindfulness is just listening, right? And this is about listening to the other person. And most people, actually, there is very little listening going on. People want to say something, and it's like I've been running these meetups a lot, and there are different kinds of, in person. And what I found is that there are many, many people, what appears to be listening is they're just waiting to speak. But actual listening is very powerful, because it actually, we've been looking at Tao Te Ching, right? It is kind of having respect for reality. It is having respect for the other person, of saying, I don't know everything. Maybe this person has something to tell me, and let me actually listen to them to see what they are saying. So it's a profound point philosophically.
I know we have some other people to speak, but I think many times we feel we need to fill the empty space in a conversation. And if you can really practice that and listen and hang back, you'll see how much more a person will actually tell you and reveal. And I think that's what's causing what you had previously mentioned, Shrikant, about this energy of how it kind of, it's exponential and so forth. But, I feel when someone ends a sentence, we feel we need to say something immediately and so forth. We don't like that sort of dead space. But if you could practice just hanging back a little bit, they have so much more to say, which contributes.
Now, that's a beautiful point. Again, a very profound point, because what happens is that we are reactive. Moment somebody stops speaking, we feel that we have to react and just put something out there. Okay. Now, what that does is that it's actually destructive. You've just, instead of doing something positive, you've done something negative, because you have interrupted something both in yourself and in the other person. So to have it also implies, kind of this, what shall I say? There is this kind of nervousness. Oh, let me do something. Let me do something. It doesn't matter what. Let me do something. Okay. But to actually hang back, right, means that you are actually respecting yourself, the other person, and the phenomena of the interaction with the other person. And you're trying to say, let's see what this is and fully experience it. instead of kind of reacting and putting something out there because you're feeling that, okay, something, something might be going wrong. So that it's a difference between kind of this nervousness and serenity. It's about saying nature is what it is, and I want to flow with that. I want to, it's again, kind of the Taoist principle of saying, have the respect for how nature is operating and work with it. So beautiful points. Thank you very much, Ray. Appreciate that. Franklin.
Thank you. Great topic. I typed exclamation point quite a long time ago, and I think everybody stole my thunder, which is great. I wanted to talk about listening. Mm-hmm. Now,
please, Franklin, we would love to have hear your take on listening. Don't worry, you can repeat. It's worth listening to this multiple times, even if this is not said enough. So please repeat it in your own words. We would really appreciate that.
Yeah, I would talk about the mind and the body, and then there's something else, which is the emotional, instinctual impulsiveness, and that's called the soul. And so we tend to be in the mind. Our culture tends to drive us up there where we're speaking and thinking, and there's this flow of words, and where that causes the instinct and the impulse to act quickly. So withdrawing that back to the body, and we're listening, at the same time we're feeling, we're kind of like going back into the body, we're paying attention, but we're feeling what's going on. And before we jump into the conversation, we might pause and say something a little more circumspect. And if we can practice that and practice that and practice that, then we have tamed this what's called the astral body, which is instinctual, impulsive imagination that tends to be running the show, getting us into a lot of trouble. But the more we make it conscious, and the more we do this thing of like withdraw, feel what's going on, get the mind to settle into the body's feeling, listen, and then try to feel what your response wants to be, as opposed to these quick, impulsive, very mental, spirit-driven themes that are not necessarily wisdom. They're more impulsive. So I really appreciated what everybody was saying, and it was a real pleasure to hear Mark. Okay, one question for Mark. You mentioned the Eastern Buddhist traditions, and
Franklin, let's pause for a second. I'll give you a chance to ask that question again, but I want to continue this theme of individual versus individual and interaction between people. I want to see if anybody, Patricia, you've not spoken before, so please go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to say that, Mark, thank you very much. I appreciated everything that you had to say. You lived up to our expectations. Thank you. But I know that I've been practicing mindfulness for quite a while, and I know that it's helped me in my work because it's helped me become less reactive. I work with children with autism, ADHD, developmental disabilities. These children can become very reactive, very impulsive. They can have these meltdowns. And as the adult, I need to be able to draw them back. The last thing they need is for me to become as reactive and, oh, stop doing that, stop doing. I need to be able to calm myself down so that I'm able to calm them down. I'm able to, stop myself from becoming so distracted by, oh no, what is, the principal's going to come by and see me. What that child needs is me to be a safe, caring person for them and to be able to listen to them. And without being able to be mindful and knowing that I need to not focus on my other thoughts, but focus on them and helping them to become mindful and get their emotions under control is what really is essential in that situation. They count on me for that.
Yeah, I think sounds like we talked about earlier about self-awareness. You being aware of the issue is huge. You being then willing to take action on it is even bigger. And I think they're very lucky to have somebody like you helping them. So I'm obviously not an expert. I'm not that familiar with it, but I do remember reading about that they'd had some great success teaching mindfulness techniques to people with children with hyperactivity disorders. I don't know about autism, but I definitely remember reading about hyperactivity, and that it could have a very rapid effect on their ability to restrain their immediate impulses.
This is my Google Classroom, and I have links here to all different meditation videos that my students can access. There's candles and classical music and, ocean waves and fish tanks, so that they can kind of be able to settle themselves down and self-regulate.
And
so it's very helpful.
Just follow up on that. I'm sure you do this. It's like, do it without judgment is huge. And I think when dealing, I'm not a child expert, so I could be off base, but I think I'm right. It's like approaching them when they are being told they're hyperactive or being told that they need to behave differently. It's judgmental. But if you can approach them in a mindful way with a lack of judgment, it's much more effective.
Yeah, reflecting back that it's okay for them to be upset, but it's not okay for them to have that behavior.
Yes, that's what I was trying to say.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Patricia. I thought that your comment was amazing, okay, because it actually adds one more dimension to it. You're saying you are responsible. You are responsible for creating a certain level, kind of upping the level of mindfulness in the class. You're not responsible just for yourself, but for these other people. Okay, that's a very powerful idea. And that's what, for example, a leader does, right? I mean, if you're trying to kind of raise the awareness of everybody that you're dealing with. And it's, again, a virtuous cycle. So the fact that they are upping their level of awareness helps you. And I think that child development is a great context to see it. I have to tell you, I attended this amazing presentation on a study of, I think, 6 to 7 year olds. They took brain images of brain activity in these children, and then they had a 6-month course of just something like 20 minutes of mindfulness meditation for over 6 months. And then they measured the brain activity. And it was stunning. The images were stunningly different. What happens is that in children, in the beginning, most of the activity was at the back of the brain, which is more of our primitive part of the brain. There's very little activity here, and there is very little activity connecting this with the back. After 6 months, the amount of activity going here went through the roof. This is our prefrontal cortex, that is, kind of focused on attention. The activity at the back went down, but more interestingly, there was this tremendous amount of activity going back and forth between the front and the back. So it was just very stunning to see those pictures. So Patricia, thank you so much for bringing up this. I mean, you've repeatedly made fantastic points, using your background in childhood education. It's very clear that, that you feel very deeply about it. You work very, very hard at it. So really, really appreciate your observations, because that gives a completely, it's a very interesting context in which to see these factors operating. So thank you.
Yeah.
Next up is question by Franklin. Franklin, go ahead. You had a question.
Okay. My question to Mark had to do with ancient wisdom traditions, and if you can think of any that come to mind, like you've mentioned Buddhism, an Eastern method, and do they offer some some vocabulary, some ideas about what's going on outside of this modern vocabulary, which is really good, but sometimes the ancient vocabulary gets at things that we're not conscious of.
Can you, what do you mean by ancient vocabulary? You mean like the like different ways, less egocentric ways of articulating things? Is that what you're
Yeah,
referring
well,
to?
like they'll have maps of the body with the physical body, the etheric body, the astral body, that kind of thing, the mental body, the bodhi body.
Well, I do take the scientific approach. So we model, we guess, we observe, we see if our models give us predictions that prove to be correct and then of value, and then we keep that model. And then maybe we come up with a better model, we find something the model doesn't explain, and we continually improve on that. So I look back at things in the past, they are what we stand upon. But hopefully we have advanced, so our understanding over the generations becomes greater. Sometimes some knowledge is lost. I'm not somebody who goes back and says, oh, there's lost wisdom. They were wiser back then than we are now. Like, yes, the ancient Greek philosophers, great thinkers, great Chinese and Indian philosophers, great thinkers, but they would think differently today. They would have the benefit of later thinkers to draw upon. So I don't raise one above the other. I recognize the contribution, but if you're talking about like the difference between the way the Eastern cultures and societies related to the world as opposed to the modern Western culture, yeah, then there is a breakdown there. And I think, we have started to recognize that there is things that can be learned there. It's not that knowledge was lost, it's been ignored. However, that doesn't mean there's not a lot of stuff that's wrong. Like Taoism, as an example, that I'm familiar with. I like a lot of the philosophy and a lot of the concepts in Taoism, and it's very observational. And out of that grew Stoicism, this observing nature. But some of the concepts they came up with based upon their observation of nature, we know now to be false. What they were observing, they were misunderstanding. We have a greater knowledge. We have access to information they didn't have. We're not better than them. We're just better informed. That doesn't mean it's invalid, but it means it's like recognize that it's not like I talked about earlier, there's no one answer for everything. Always take these things, view these things with a skeptical viewpoint. That's where I come from on this. So look at it, question it, don't accept anything on blind faith. If it can be of use, put it in your toolbox. If not, put it to one side. That's how I look at it.
Oh, wonderful. So I want to say one thing, Mark. It was really interesting that both of us kind of zeroed in on this issue of what does mindfulness mean in interaction with other people. And it was amazing to see the answers and observations that everybody put together right on the fly. I was particularly impressed by that. What do you think?
Well, I like that because so often in these conversations, people focus on the self. And you know me, I'm attracted to not limiting it to the self, but I was trying to keep it very simple tonight, so I didn't go there. But Deborah, and I think there was another gentleman who's left now who brought it up. I'm very glad that they did, because it's very hard to have a fulfilled life on your own. And we are social creatures. So yeah, in these conversations, it's always good to be reminded that there's always an important component that if you don't include other people, you're not telling the whole story.
Yep. Wonderful. All right, folks. So this was fantastic meetup. Thank you so much. And we've got all kinds of interesting things. If you're interested in Taoism, we've got some incredible meetups coming up. Tomorrow, we are going to look into, I think, point number 2 and point number 3 of Taoism. And on next Monday, Yasuhiko Kimura is going to be back. And he's a very deep thinker, and he has done a translation. He translated Tao Te Ching about 20 years ago. And he's been working at it ever since. So he's going to be presenting on the principles of Tao Te Ching and what it means for the 21st century. So that's coming up at 12 p.m. Eastern time next Monday. And so hope to see you back soon. Bye, everybody. Bye.